Every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, a small golden retriever sat quietly in front of the tall glass gates of Marshall Enterprises, one of the largest companies in the city. He never barked, never caused trouble, never even crossed the line where the security guard stood. He simply waited. No one knew why. The employees grew used to seeing him, sitting there in rain or sunshine, looking toward the main door as if expecting someone who never came. But one cold morning, after months of his silent visits, the dog did not come. And that day, something inside the heart of the company's CEO, Daniel Marshall, began to break. If you believe in kindness, loyalty, and second chances, then please take a moment to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Because today's story will remind you that love and loyalty are not bound by words, wealth, or status. Daniel Marshall was the kind of man everyone in the corporate world admired and feared at the same time. A self-made billionaire, known for his discipline, his precision, and his silence. His days were filled with board meetings, stock updates, and endless decisions. But behind that confident exterior, Daniel lived alone in a vast house on the hill, a home that echoed with emptiness. His wife had passed away 5 years earlier, and since then, his only son Ethan had drifted away too. Their relationship had fallen apart after the accident that took Daniel's wife. The boy blamed his father for working too much, for not being there when the family needed him most. Daniel had buried himself in work, believing that time would heal things. But time had only deepened the distance. Then came the day when Daniel first saw the dog. It was a Monday morning. The guards told him about a golden retriever that had been waiting outside since early dawn. At first, Daniel ignored it. He wasn't a man who paid attention to such things. But when he saw it himself, something stirred within him. The dog looked tired, thin, and hungry. Yet there was something in its eyes, a kind of hope, a quiet faith that someone inside those gates mattered to it. Daniel ordered the guards not to chase it away. The next day, the dog returned again, and then the next. Weeks turned into months. Every morning, as Daniel's car entered the gate, the dog would stand and wag its tail gently, as if greeting an old friend. Daniel began to notice. He started keeping dog treats in his car. Sometimes he'd throw one out the window, sometimes he'd stop for a moment, roll down the glass, and look into those honest brown eyes. He didn't know why, but that small connection began to bring warmth into his cold, mechanical routine. One rainy evening, as Daniel was leaving work, he saw the dog still waiting by the gate, soaked, shivering, but refusing to move. Something inside him broke that day. He got out of the car, walked toward the gate, and stood silently in front of the animal. The dog looked up at him, wagged its tail slowly, and leaned forward as if recognizing someone it had lost long ago. Daniel whispered softly, almost to himself, "Who are you waiting for?" The dog, of course, said nothing, but Daniel felt an ache in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Over time, the employees began to talk. Some said the dog once belonged to a delivery boy who used to work nearby. Others claimed it was from a poor neighborhood across the bridge. Daniel didn't care for rumors. What mattered was that the dog kept showing up, loyal and silent, never expecting anything in return. Slowly, Daniel began to change. He smiled more. He started talking to his staff with kindness, took interest in people's lives, and even began calling his son again, though Ethan never picked up. But the dog kept coming, reminding him every day that unconditional loyalty still existed. Then one morning, Daniel noticed the dog didn't show up. The hours passed, and unease grew inside him. He sent one of the guards to check the nearby streets, but there was no sign of it. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. It felt strange. The gate felt empty, his day incomplete. The next morning, he personally drove around the area, searching. Finally, at the far end of the street, under an old bus stop, he found the golden retriever lying weak, injured, and barely breathing. Someone must have hit it with a car and left it there. Daniel knelt beside it, his expensive suit soaking in the mud. He gently lifted the dog and took it to the nearest animal hospital. For the first time in years, Daniel prayed. He stayed in the waiting area for hours, his mind spinning with memories of the past, his wife, his son, his mistakes. When the doctor came out and said the dog would survive but needed time and care, Daniel felt relief like never before. He took the dog home that night. Over the next few weeks, he nursed it back to health. He named him Buddy. The bond between them grew strong, stronger than Daniel had ever imagined possible. Buddy became his companion, his silent reminder that love doesn't need to speak to be felt. But the story didn't end there. One afternoon, while walking Buddy in a nearby park, Daniel met a young boy feeding pigeons by the bench. The boy looked about 14, thin, with the same gentle eyes as Buddy's. The dog ran up to him instantly, wagging its tail, barking excitedly. The boy gasped, tears filling his eyes as he hugged the dog tightly. "Buddy," he cried. Daniel stood frozen. The boy looked up and said, "Sir, he's my dog. He went missing months ago." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He smiled sadly and said, "Then he was waiting for you." The boy nodded and told Daniel how his family had moved to a smaller house after his father lost his job. They couldn't afford to look for the dog, but Buddy somehow found his way across the city every day, waiting by the gates where the boy's father once worked as a cleaner for the same company. Daniel was stunned. He realized Buddy had been waiting not for him, but for the boy's father, a man who had lost his job when the company downsized years ago. Under Daniel's leadership that night, Daniel couldn't sleep again. He sat beside Buddy and whispered, "You weren't just waiting, you were teaching me what I'd forgotten." The next morning, Daniel called a company meeting. He announced a new policy to rehire employees who had been laid off unfairly. He started a foundation to help families struggling after job losses. The boy's father was the first person he brought back. Weeks later, Buddy still came to the gate, but now he came joyfully, with Daniel and the boy walking beside him. The once cold glass doors of Marshall Enterprises now opened not just to business, but to compassion and humanity. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, it's not people who remind us how to be human, it's a loyal heart that never gives up. And before you go, tell us in the comments below, have you ever met an animal that changed the way you see life? The dog stopped coming to the gate one day because his purpose was fulfilled. But for Daniel, his heart had finally learned to open again, not through success or wealth, but through the silent loyalty of a friend who never spoke, yet said everything that mattered.